Hi, this is the part 4 video for chapter 6 on Motown pop and Southern soul. We're picking things up with the stories of Aretha Franklin and James Brown in this final video for chapter 6. Aretha Franklin was raised in the gospel tradition. She grew up in the Detroit area as the daughter of a very prominent, nationally famous preacher who was close friends with Martin Luther King Jr., so she was deeply exposed to gospel music traditions, was singing lead in her church gospel choir as a young child. By the time she was a young woman, she had developed quite a reputation as a lounge and nightclub singer and broke out prominently through Atlantic Records as a soul and R&B singer. Among her most notable songs is the tune "Respect," though there are many Aretha Franklin songs that I would encourage you to check out. But this particular tune, not written by Aretha Franklin, originally written by Otis Redding, who we've already studied in previous Southern soul aspects. Otis Redding originally wrote the song "Respect," intended to be sung by himself, a man, about the respect that he hoped to have when he was coming home from work after a hard day on the job and didn't want to be criticized by his wife when he got home. However, this song, when sung by Aretha Franklin, it completely turns the tables and is about a woman seeking the respect that she deserves. And Aretha Franklin's version of Otis Redding's song "Respect" took off way farther and achieved far greater success than his original. In fact, he was anecdotally said to have been quoted as saying, "I may have written this song, but it's hers now." He was quite adamant that she had taken it in a totally new tone and direction and meaning. When you listen to this tune, you're not going to see anything too complicated in its form. We're looking at a modified simple verse in the standard 4/4 meter. You're going to have a lot more of those Stax horn line timbres, which really sets that Southern soul style apart, where we're getting saxophones, trombones, and trumpets backing up the rhythm section and vocals. You're going to hear a lot of that vocal repetition, where you hear a lyrical line repeated again and again and again, which is a common characteristic of gospel and soul music. For example, repeated lyrics in this tune are things where you'll hear the background singers say just a little bit again and again, or sock it to me again and again. You're going to hear Aretha Franklin do a little bit of lead vocal improvisation, not as much as you would hear if this was a live performance, but again, that vocal repetition in the background vocals, the horn line, that's a very Stax common feature, and a little bit of a vocal improvisation going on. All of these things are going to characterize this as a Southern soul piece of music. And Aretha Franklin, the first woman to be inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, a powerful, tremendous musician. Last in this chapter, we are going to turn to James Brown. And James Brown also comes out of an R&B soul tradition. And he is well known as as literally, quote, the hardest working man in show business. His live performances are tremendous, and if you have a chance, I recommend go YouTube one of his live performances and hear what that is all about. Much of the African-American pop music that we're studying out of this 1960s, it's as much about the way it sounds as the way it is presented in live performance. And James Brown was famous for having a very tightly run, well-organized entourage of musicians on stage with him. Not only did they do choreography, even if they were in the horn line, they did choreography. But not only were they choreographed kinesthetically together, but they were famous for how tightly and precisely the rhythms were played. Listen for the way in the song "Papa's Got a Brand New Bag," Part 1 from 1965. Listen for how cleanly, clearly, and precisely the rhythms are played, from the vocals sung by James Brown to the syncopated bari sax played in the horn line to the chanking, as James Brown referred to the way the guitar would play the rhythm chords in such a tight, clean way that there was no sustain. There wasn't like a jom, it was a ta-tika. And that very chanking, short note, no sustain, these are all characteristics of what makes James Brown's soulful music start to introduce what we call funk music. And in fact, James Brown likes to say that he was the inventor of funk. There's a great story about they were working on this particular song, Papa's Got a Brand New Bag, in the recording studio, and they were playing through it. The whole band was cooking, and James Brown messed up his lyrics, or felt like he had to go back and hear something he had done. He wanted to like stop midway and hear how things were going. So they paused and they went into the studio to hear the playback, and everyone was in there from the band listening along, and they were expecting it to be unfinished. There were still more things they were planning to add, but they noticed that everyone who was listening to this, well, first of all, the lyrics were just fine the way James Brown sang them, but they also noticed that everyone was bobbing their head. Everyone was dancing and moving around as they listened to the playback, and they thought, you know what? It's done. It's fine just the way it is. And they decided to cut it that way without adding a lot of the other extra things that would have filled in the empty spaces in between the bass line, the empty rests in between the rhythm section. They left those spaces or rests, those syncopated negative spaces of music open. And that is one way in words to try and describe the difference between funk and soul, is that funk is going to have a greater emphasis on space between the syncopated bass line, space between the notes that are being played, rather than filler and sustain and lots of held out notes. Funk is going to have a greater emphasis on accented hits that are syncopated with space in between, especially in the bass line. So listen for that in Papa's Got a Brand New Bag. And as we get into the funk coming later in the late 60s and 70s with Sly and the Family Stone or George Clinton, think back to this piece as possibly the origination of funk music.